Hi, everyone. This is the Ego Project, and I am Lisa Heidel, and I'm here with,
Cristine Seidel.
and we are going to be talking about parental wounding on this one. Cristine, I'm
Right.
so excited.
Yes, I am so excited. That's probably one of the biggest things that has kind of come back with some of our, just the original Ego Project podcast about the wounded ego, the origins of the ego, are people's stories and testimonials of their own wounding in childhood. So this is gonna be a good one.
I think so too. I'm very excited. Before we get started, I want to just kind of tell you, that last conversation, our season 2 premiere with MJ from Soulful Revolution, that was amazing. We want to say, check out MJ's workshops, tarot certification, spirituality classes, spiritual business, tarot readings online. She was just amazing. What did you think, Cristine?
I thought she was great. I mean, she is like the embodiment of her own energy, like you could totally just sense that and really just kind of a connection of like an intuitive space. And what I loved about it was like, it was her own manifestation of it. It wasn't like, this is what a spiritual person is supposed to sound like or look like. It was just like her authentic self. And so that really resonated. And as I've looked at, some of the comments on the YouTube and podcasts, that's what people love about her. So if you're looking to connect and really just work with somebody or learn from somebody that is really authentically the embodiment of their own intuitive nature, she's your girl. So
I so agree. And I love that she was so transparent about the ego wounding and healing work she's done. I think, that's why we're here. We want to talk about that. We want to explore that with people, and we want to make it mainstream, that we are works in progress, people.
yes, absolutely.
It's not like we reach this place and it's the destination and we're perfect and we have no issues, we have no struggles. So I so love that conversation. We'll put MJ's information in the description so that you can find her workshops and everything else. And if you haven't seen it, go back and watch that season 2 premiere. It's MJ from Soulful Revolution on spirituality. Okay. Now, without further ado, let's jump into this. I'm going to share a little bit, Cristine, about where I am, because we told our listeners and viewers that we would tell where we're at when we're traveling, and also why I'm here, which completely ties in with our topic today with parental wounding. I'm in Charleston, South Carolina right now. And for those that don't know, I'm actually on the West Coast. So I traveled all the way across the country with a brief stop in the Midwest and got out right before the snowstorm.
Oh my goodness, good job.
I just hopped right over it. And now I'm in South Carolina, and I am here doing research for a large writing and multimedia project that I'm working on. And it's all about ancestral clearing and healing. And what a coincidence, right? That this topic came. And I have learned so much about, my heritage, my lineage, and the wounding, the wounds.
Yeah, absolutely.
They inflicted and that were inflicted upon them. And, so I've been going generation to generation, and right now we're going to be talking about the parents. Closest links. So I'm ready to get started if you are.
I am ready. This is probably one of my very favorite topics to talk about when we talk about ego wounding, especially.
Great. Well, we're going to start right off with the very first question. What is parental wounding?
So parental wounding is really, as we look at the epigenetics of belief systems, we really do have kind of an imprinting by the age of like 6 years old. Really, our belief systems about ourselves, about our world, we kind of talked about that in the earlier videos. And, that imprinting comes from those that are influencing our environment, which, in utero, right, could even be the genetics of, what you're talking about, some of that ancestry type of wounding. And then upon birth, from birth to age 6, our caretakers are the ones that are imprinting those belief systems that are stored really in our nervous system. And there's such cool research that's coming out about the nervous system, which is that mind-body connection, and how it influences not just our patterns and our beliefs and behaviors, but literally some of our physiological effects, such as MS, multiple sclerosis, and Parkinson's, and just these disorders that we can see has just this flood of stress hormones over a period of life. So parental wounding is really going back and looking at, those early influences that we're doing that imprinting on our belief systems. And, we understand that not everybody has the same, family origin story, so there are other people that are influencing the imprinting, but organically and biologically, that visceral parent-child connection imprints, whether a child has been adopted and they have, adoptive parents, or whether they, have absent parents, whatever it is, there's imprinting based upon, those caregiver roles, which is the mother and father organically.
Okay. And so I'm so glad that you said that, because it's not just our biological parents. It can be step parents. It can be, even, partners, grandparents, whomever is the day-to-day caregivers. Is that basically?
Yes. Yeah. So, so in families where perhaps, the biological parents could not, raise the children, and let's just say, had the grandparents raise the children, there's a wounding of that organic biological absence of the biological mother or father. And then potentially whatever messages or belief systems were instilled by the grandparents, if there was a layer of wounding in that. So it can be the organic connection, or it could be those placeholders of the caregivers that were in a child's life.
And you mentioned ages birth through 6.
Mm-hmm.
And is there a reason that those years are so pivotal?
Yeah, developmentally, this is where the nervous system is it's growing and developing. And so, you think about a child that comes into the world and cannot meet its own needs, like at all, at a very basic level. That is what's developing between birth and age 6 is needs being met, emotionally, situationally, physically. And so that is what teaches security and safety into a person. After the age of 6, you see developmentally, they can maybe fix their own cereal, or they can go get their own, cup of water. They can tell somebody their feelings are hurt. But up until that point, they are really just being imprinted as to how their needs are met.
Okay, that's very good. So from an ego perspective, when you're working with clients, how do you see this parental wounding show up in adults or teens or early, young adults, and then as they age?
It's such a wide spectrum of how it shows up. We know that the ego is really here to protect us, and from a wounded perspective, it gives these like really false beliefs in more of an exaggerated way. And so, like we've talked about in previous podcasts, it either shows up as like an internalized, kind of wounding, or it shows up as an externalized, and each developmental stage, either from birth, from early childhood to adults, the internalized could be, insecurity, low self-esteem, lack of peer connectedness, to externalizing could be, maladaptive behaviors, acting out, adult substance, issues, sex addiction, as well as like codependency. So really, as a therapist, when somebody comes in with any kind of like presenting concern, we're typically looking at some kind of, parental wounding that we have to look at. And, so many people, adults especially, are just kind of like, what, I don't know what's going on with me. I just know I'm anxious. I just know like I struggle in these situations, and I don't know why I had this great childhood, and, you're kind of like, well, let's look at that a little bit deeper. And, it's pretty fascinating to hear people, really be dismissive of their own experiences that were, fairly harmful to them at the time, and they've kind of just buried it.
So is that where you see a lot of attachment struggles, like avoidant attachment? And can you talk a little bit about those types of attachment issues?
Yeah, I mean, I'll kind of just talk about like anxious and avoidant, and then secure attachment. So, secure attachment is really kind of like what we're all trying to get to, in our relationships. And that is, just really knowing how to ask for your needs to be met, and also how to meet other people's needs. And you just feel very trusting in being able to kind of vet people as to whether or not there's somebody you can have kind of a reciprocal relationship. You feel very secure in not needing to meet your own parents' emotional needs. Somebody was kind of asking me about that the other day. They were like, well, is it just that we don't meet our parents' needs? And I was like, no, as your parents age and they become less mobile, and they have needs that you may be wanting to meet, but their emotional needs, their needs to feel safe and secure and validated in this world is not yours. And so that's definitely something we want to clarify. So the secure attachment knows very well, how to ask for their needs to be met, and even know what their needs are, and then also be able to meet other people's needs without having any kind of complexities of that. Now, the anxious attachment is more about this lack of security and almost franticness about having their needs met. So they are typically, people describe very clingy, need to be validated and affirmed regularly. If somebody appears upset with them, like, are you upset with me? What can I do? And tends to have some very codependent traits and what would be considered needy or clingy traits, because they're really afraid that their needs are not going to be met, or they are going to be abandoned or rejected. And then the avoidant attachment is one that is almost apathetic to somebody meeting their needs, and completely disinterested in meeting somebody else's needs. So they're the ones that appear very protective, but not necessarily aggressive, but just uninterested. And oftentimes what we find is this anxious avoidant combination as we move into like kind of adulthood, where you have somebody who, seems kind of like detached, and the other person is desperately trying to get them to affirm them, and you get this anxious avoidant attachment. And then we have kind of amongst those kind of a spectrum of a combination of those. And, we can be avoidant, but still be closer to secure. And we can be anxious, but still moving closer to secure. So like I said in previous podcasts, it's all a spectrum. And I think we could probably recognize a little bit of all of that in ourselves for sure.
Yeah. Well, and that's always the question, right? Because we reach adulthood, and part of being an adult is being accountable for your own choices, and, making good decisions for yourself. And, pointing a finger at your parents seems kind of immature, like you're not growing up, but this is important stuff. Mm-hmm. This is how all of this was established. Yeah. So I'm going to throw out some things that I have questions about, as well as that have been posed to me. And I'm going to, one, if you're an adult, and, of course, there's a spectrum of wounding and trauma that people have gone through. That doesn't mean, that, your wounding isn't important. It's just there's a spectrum to the point where, severe abuse, all the way to, maybe you weren't allowed to have a voice in your home. All of that is important because it's important to the individual. But there is a spectrum to that. So we're going to try to, cover a large bit of ground here. So let's say that you are struggling as an adult to form strong attachments to people, and you have a feeling that maybe some of this started early. Maybe, you see it with your parents, maybe they had not a good marriage, or maybe there was early divorce, and you want to explore that, and you've gone to therapy. How do you bring that up to your parents? Do you need to go back to the parent? That's one question.
Yeah, I mean, man, that's some heavy stuff, because, when you kind of become aware of really the origin of what's going on here, and when I'm working with clients, I'm like, you can see the patterns, you can see that familiar pattern, because the ego loves what's familiar to it, because that feels safe, whether it feels good or not, it feels familiar, right? And so you can really see people's patterns. And as an individual, look at your patterns. What do you see continuously kind of showing up in relationships? And that, it doesn't mean just intimate relationships. That could be friendships. It could be work relationships. That pattern will surface in some way, shape, or form. So when adults become kind of aware of it, they're like, well, I could never go talk to I know what I would call my dad, and I would say, hey, this is, and he'd be like, okay, son, well, I gotta go. Your mom's calling, right? Like, a lot of adults will already know what kind of that response is. And that just kind of goes to show like how deeply rooted that wound is they are already protecting themselves from the response. Now, some parents are open and available for reparative work, but a lot of them aren't. If we're still showing up in adulthood with a lot of unresolved stuff, it's because, that parent-child relationship really never evolved kind of from where the wounding is. So, do you have to go back to the parent? No, you don't. I mean, really, parental wounding is really about reparative work with self, and almost, people have probably heard reparenting yourself, being the parent to yourself that you really needed. Because sometimes going to your parent and looking for reparative work actually does a little bit more of that rewounding. But some people really do want to honor, like, this was my experience, and I need to be able to say it to you. And for those individuals, you have to do the work to really be able to be like, regardless of whatever the result is of this, I'm still okay. I'm doing this for myself, and not because I'm needing a response from that parent other than whatever they organically are going to have.
As we progress through the conversation, I want to return to that idea of parental fragility, because I think, once again, that's caretaking of the parent, right? When you're worried about their response, you're worried about their feelings, but there is some growth there. And, sharing a little bit about my experience. My mother passed away about 10 years ago. And a few years before she passed, she and I met each other kind of in the middle. And we both showed up. We both did a lot of the work that needed to be done. And it wasn't perfect. And, there was things that I wish we'd had more time to do. But we were able to heal some of that. And it was because she showed up. And I showed up, and we showed up without accusation, with the willingness of, I was willing to see her as a person, with her own wounding, that existed long before I came on the scene, right? And then she was able to meet me as an adult child.
Right. Yeah, that's the key right there. Still her child, but an adult. Yeah.
Yes. And I saw myself as an adult as well. The needs that I needed her to meet as a child, I was now meeting for myself.
Right. Yeah.
And that reparenting that you mentioned, I changed my self-talk. I speak to myself as I would a beloved friend. I'm very aware of my inner child and that healing. I check in with her regularly, all the things that I wish my mother would have been able to do, but she wasn't, due to her wounding. And, I don't name call, I call myself terms of endearment, I'm very gentle with me. And, and it's a very conscious act to do that. And so I kind of want to talk about that. How, how do people show up because, the people who aren't showing up in your office, they're doing their work or maybe not
Yeah.
doing their work, depending.
Yeah.
So what does it look like for, individuals? And then can you break it into what does it look like with parental wounding with females and then with males? I'm curious about that difference.
Yeah. So what's interesting about working with people on this, kind of core wounding and doing the healing work with it is exactly kind of what you talked about, having a parent available for it, and then having a parent who's not, whether, because they are no longer with us or because they're just emotionally not available for it. And, I do this work with children and their parents, anywhere from kids, 8 up to adults, and in a lot of those sessions, the parent is available for it. And it's very interesting to see that defensiveness from a parenting perspective automatically show up, just this be like, I need, yes, but. And so really teaching the parent in that dynamic, whether, their child is still a minor or whether they're an adult, that the most reparative work is just to listen and reflect, and then repair where repair is needed. And repair doesn't have to say you'll see parents go from like, yes, but to, I know I was an awful parent, and so just that ego fragility of like sitting in this space, that all it really takes is that parent to just tune into what the child is saying and attend to witnessing that feeling, and so watching that happen, I have to be very careful as like kind of the gatekeeper to the client, is if the parent can't do it, then we kind of have to stop at that place and really just do that work with the individual. And so that's kind of, the dance with a parent that's available, but we have to navigate it with real skills, to, the opposite of that is a client whose parent is not available for it. And for, a lot of times when the parent is not available for it, the client goes in there and is very dismissive of the wound, at first, and is kind of like, yeah, but, and, it's not like, they beat me, or it's not like, I didn't have food. And they're very protective of almost that parent-child relationship. And as a therapist, you almost act as this reflective parent for them, just to model that attunement and being attended to where they can start doing it themselves. And kind of a fascinating session I had recently was that as it was a minor client, and the mom was available, and I know she wanted it, but that fragile ego started getting defensive, and the client kept looking over to me, like needing me to attend in that moment, because that was such a vulnerable space, and, I had to, in a way, guide and model that attunement, because it's in our own wounding, that's really hard to give in such a vulnerable space where we're being looked at a very visceral place of a parent, So, so that, that's kind of like the work, when a parent's available for it, is just, it's very gentle, and the dance is very simple, but protective. And then without the parent, you really need to have a reflective space of somebody who can show you what that looks like, so you can do it for yourself. And that could be a coach or a mentor or a therapist, but somebody who really knows what reflective kind of parenting looks like, and, tuning in and attending. Now, how it shows up for men and women is, it's similar, but totally different. And, really it goes into kind of the masculine and feminine energy. And I know, for some listeners that might be either new vernacular or kind of like cringy vernacular, because we're kind of gender aware now. You could also consider it kind of receiving and initiating energy. The feminine energy is the energy that receives, and the masculine energy is the energy that initiates. And, but for this conversation, I'll kind of talk about masculine and feminine. So, the feminine is the mother, kind of the mother wound. And so from a mothering perspective, what a child receives is love and nurturing and care and just this like loving outpouring energy that is to fill the child up, right? And not in an ego inflating way, but just in a very attending way, right? So that's the receiving energy. And then on the other side, the masculine energy is more of the giving energy. So that's the energy of protecting, cherishing, just really kind of like, not like giving as far as in the same way that a mother love does, but more of a protective provision way, So the feminine is more of the child's ability to receive love, to receive care, and the masculine is the child's way of being protected, of being provided for. So those are kind of the parental care that children are supposed to receive. And then how the wounding occurs is for a child, like when the feminine energy is supposed to be like pouring love or whatever, the child may not be getting it either because the parent's absent or maybe self-involved or dismissive or passive or whatever it is, right? And the child is dysregulated in its ability to receive. So that's kind of the receiving wound. And then from the masculine or the father wounding is in a child's ability to feel protected, to feel provided for. So you can kind of see, like, that doesn't go into men and women, but you can see where the wounding kind of could be created. Does that make sense?
It does. And for clarity, so, for our listeners and make sure I understand what you're saying. So we have both feminine and masculine energies inside of us.
Right. Given by our parental energies. Yes.
So from a spiritual viewpoint, we are born with both, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And so let's say that, like you said, using the feminine energy, withholding, self-involved, unable, their wounding is unable to give that nurturing. Will it show itself as someone who will crave it, and vice versa? Right. So if it's masculine, you didn't feel protected, you'll feel like you can't protect yourself. Am I accurate about that? Am I close?
Yeah. And I think you did a great job of saying, hey, so when you are born, when you're created, you have both that masculine and feminine energy, right? And our parental energy, the mother being the feminine and the father being the masculine, they're the ones that kind of reflect how to use it or how to work with it, right? So from the feminine, because it is the nurturing, the loving, we are from our feminine energy receiving all of that. So if there's a disruption in the ability to love, to nurture, to support, to forgive, that's a good one too, to forgive, then the child will have a disruption in that being able to receive. So it's like either doesn't know how to receive or is desperate to receive. So you can see how that can turn into the internalizer and the externalizer, right? So
in order to receive, you have to see yourself as someone worthy of being given to. And if your main caregiver, feminine, when you say female, but the feminine energy you did not perceive yourself as worthy from them, then it's the cyclic thing, right? You want it, you crave it, maybe you chase it.
Correct. Yeah, that would be the externalizer. Yep.
But then when you receive it, you'll reject it.
Yeah. So there's this discomfort in receiving, or there is a discomfort in not like not having it, right? So from an internalizer perspective, it might be having a difficulty receiving compliments, right? Like not being able to fully receive a compliment. From an externalizer perspective, it's needing somebody to constantly compliment you, right? Because for whatever reason, that feminine energy that should just be pouring love and care and forgiveness and compassion was disrupted with either criticisms or control or expectations, conditions, right? So conditional love disrupts receiving exponentially,
Oh, that's good. Well, not good, but
right. Like it's good. So it shows you that as children, our experience of receiving love has got to be, we are loved because we are good and worthy and valuable, regardless of what we do, what we become, what we achieve, how we meet our parents' emotional needs. So many of conversations I have with parents, a child will express how they feel and they'll be like, that hurts my feelings. Like just the inability to have their own feelings, and a parent be okay with that there's no condition for them to have their feelings. So that is the mother wound, so to speak. So when a child, when there are disruptions to being able to receive love, then it shows up in the internalizer, externalizer ways of receiving.
Oh, that's so good. And now I'm going to go ahead and let's do that for the masculine energy. That was a great explanation on it. Now, the masculine energy in our cultures, it's about, like you said, being protected, being
provided for, right?
Thank you. Obviously, there's some struggle for Lisa. That's all I had for the masculine energy.
Yes.
So I'm
all ears, right? All ears.
Please give it to me.
Yeah. Okay. So I think it's good to note when we didn't get the energy that we needed in childhood, we overcompensate for it, right? And so that's where the pattern comes from. So when we talk about the masculine energy, which is the energy of provision and protection, if we didn't have that, given to us in appropriate ways, perhaps our masculine energy parent was a workaholic, or was overly critical, or an alcoholic, or absent, or just children should be seen and not heard. Just this, which we've had such a patriarchal society, like we let a lot of masculines just be whatever parent they were and say, well, at least he's still in the home, let's be glad about that, right? But that is the energy of, let me provide for you, let me protect you. And protection is just not just the physical, but it is in, like if a child is being bullied at school, that the father or masculine shows up to protect his child, to have the conversation with the school administration, right? Like, I'm going to protect my child. So, again, when we are lacking that as children, we will overly compensate for it. So you will become overly protective and overly, providing for yourself. So it might look like, I don't need no man, right? Or I can do this myself. I don't need your help. On the other side of it, it could also be very difficult to activate giving to others. Well, you should be able to do that yourself. You don't need my help. You wanted these rights, you got them. You do it, right? Like, not knowing how to activate that of giving. So the wound looks like, I will do for myself and I don't need anybody else to protect and provide for me. Or it will look like, you can do for yourself, I don't need to protect or provide for you. See how that?
That's really good. And I think it's interesting because I'm reflecting on how in our culture, so many, myself included, and so many people, we have wounding in both of these
Oh yeah.
energies.
Yeah, we get that third door, right? What's behind door number 3?
Exactly.
The mother and the father wound.
Exactly. And because so often, sure, okay, let's say you only need to heal your feminine, or you only need to heal your masculine. Well, we're using both all the time, which means that they're susceptible to wounding.
Yeah.
And of course, our models also, so there's 6 energies.
Yeah. Yes. Right.
Right.
Hanging out together. Yeah.
And engaging with each other and impacting each other and very possibly causing wounding. I thank you for describing that, because I've heard it described in many different ways, and that was very clear for me. I am, hyper independent.
Yes. Yeah.
My father passed away when I was 15. So there was the wounding there as I was moving into young adulthood, late teens, So all of this has come into play, and I'm very aware of this now, right. But being aware and healing is very different. So can we talk a little bit about, let's say that someone's listening and they're like, ding, ding, ding. I recognize myself in, what they're describing. What is the very first thing that they can do? And then how can they start that healing path?
Yeah, I think that's, I always love, like, it's so cool to talk about things, but what do we do? It's always my, like in therapy, they're always like, so what's the solution? How do I fix this? And I think that that's something we should always, leave on, steps to take. And I think we should definitely, and we talked about this in our last podcast with MJ, we definitely have space to go into talking about the masculine and feminine energies and our disruption of them as we've kind of gone through life. But the parental core wounds, we always look at the pattern, awareness, acceptance, and action, So being aware of patterns of something, either listening to this or reading something, if it's starting to trigger something, be like, that kind of sounds like maybe what's going on with me. I have a really hard time receiving, or maybe I'm always expecting people to constantly pour into me, or maybe I'm hyper independent, or I expect people to be independent. If those patterns are becoming aware, that's your first indicator. Let me lean into it. The second piece is acceptance. Let me accept that my parents were not perfect. Let me accept that my wounding is valid, even though it wasn't a big T. I do have little T trauma. It hurt to be criticized all the time. My mom always, controlled everything I wore. My dad wouldn't let me go out with friends, unless I was chaperoned or whatever it is, right? And then the third piece, which is what we're going to go into, is that those actions, the healing work of parental woundings, of core wounds. And, the first step I would say is always to kind of, and we say this in almost all the podcasts, withdraw to self, come back to self. And people are like, what does that even mean? Boundaries are a form of withdrawing from the regular contact with a wound, right? So whether that's with people or whether that's with patterns, withdraw and have a boundary there to be able to say, okay, I need to take a moment to put this boundary here, put a barrier to the consistent wounding, the neural pathway that keeps playing itself over and over again, so that I can withdraw to self. And withdraw to self means, start acknowledging what these actual feelings are without judgment. Our practice just had a whole week on like having non-judgmental feelings and emotions. Journal, hey, this is what I'm feeling today. I feel really lonely. I feel really hurt. Allow those to actually say something without any kind of judgment, around it. And then, the third piece is really work on that receiving and giving to self, right? So what does it feel like to receive, to really give to myself, to really receive? So try that with yourself. So that might look like, I'm going to give myself compliments today, or I'm going to allow other people to give me a compliment and just say thank you. It's a very small receiving act. And also giving to self. How can I give to myself today? And then practice that with people that you really, really trust, and that you know it's okay to be vulnerable with them. So those are the small steps, but working with somebody who's a really good reflective space for that masculine and feminine wounding is really the place to kind of role play with that, whether that's with a therapist or a coach or somebody who's done some of that inner child core wound work, because so much of that wounding needs that identity poured back into them to create the neuro pathway that's no longer rehearsing itself from early childhood. So yeah, what are the kind of things you've done?
Very similar to what you just described. I've worked with therapists, through that process, workshops, so that I have a better understanding about that energy, the feminine, masculine energy. It is an ongoing process. None of us get out of this unscathed.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
And once again, the work that I was able to do with my mother, and I also find that although both of my parents have passed, my biological father, who gave up his rights when I was a toddler, I don't have a relationship with, but my stepfather who passed away, I did. And I still have healing relationships with them where I, meditate and have conversations with them. So I just really want to encourage people, even if you don't have the, if they're still living, but you don't have a relationship. And then if they've passed, you can still do a lot of that healing work. It just requires imagination.
It does. Yeah, absolutely.
Use imagination for other things, envisioning, we remember the past, and that's a memory, and that's, connecting, rewrite that a little bit. What do you wish you would have said? How do you wish that would have been handled? And just do that work, but it is ongoing. And I definitely encourage people, when you first begin, get someone who has a distance, a therapist, a coach, a trusted friend, and allow them to mirror back to you.
Yes. I think, I love that you kind of said, whether your parents are with you or not, because I think that there is a space in the healing work where we honor the path that our own parents had to travel to get to where they are. And, they are a product of their own wounding and kind of like what you're doing, some of that ancestral, generational energetic trauma that travels, and, honoring that they showed up in a space of wounding themselves, but also understanding that doesn't excuse or validate. And I love that you said, like, using your imagination, building an archetype of the parent that you need, and allowing yourself to kind of connect with that, and allowing the parent that, was placed in your life permission to kind of fall away in the way that it needs to, especially if they've already passed, and loving them from a place of release and forgiveness for self, not for that person, and not to overfunction or caretake, right? Because we know what that means. I need to tell everybody I forgave them, well, do you really, or can you just forgive for yourself? And so I think that's a really good point to bring about, and having a space of reflective attunement and somebody attending to you. And relationships, intimate relationships, are the mirror of our wounds, but they're also the mirror of our healing work as well. So, whether that's an intimate relationship that you have as a mirror, or a therapist, or a very competent coach that's very familiar with this, if you can find a space that is a very healthy mirror, and you can authentically have these conversations, the universe will teach us a lesson until we learn it, right? So letting that person be a mirror to show you the lesson that needs to be learned, and trust that it's safe enough to learn it.
That's so beautiful to hear you put words into that, because I think so often, especially when we're in a place of struggle, we just kind of, like, it seems so big. right? But there's steps that you can take to get you there. Now, and I also want to, reiterate, the work that I do, it's not, well, they're gone,
Yeah. Oh, right.
I mean, I hold them accountable for the wounding, that I and my siblings have endured, but I can still love them, right? That's the beauty of parenting, right? You get that unconditional love from your child.
Yeah.
Even if you don't.
Yeah. Organically, I mean, working with children for so long, children organically want that unconditional love from that biological parent. They just do. I mean, even, children, adopted at birth still desire to know and somehow be in connection with this birth parent. And so that's okay to feel that. And it's okay to work through that from a place of love. It doesn't take away from anything else. And it doesn't give permission for the wounding to continue and or that it was okay. You just get to a place of acceptance and what we talked about with MJ, radical acceptance. On the other side of that, you get to see, how can I move forward for myself?
Well, I have this question. Now, we've been talking from the child to parent. So let's say that you are a parent and you recognize that, you fell short, you had your own wounding that got translated and handed down to the next generation. And we talked a little bit about, parental fragility.
Yeah.
Where, that fragile, because so often, I mean, what is it? We judge ourselves by our intentions, but other people, we judge them by their behaviors.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So the parent is looking at their intention. I've yet to hear a new parent go, my goal in life is really to mess up this child. Come on. I'm an achiever. No one says that. They have the best intentions most when the child is born.
Right. Yes.
And so can we talk a little bit, let's say, you're a parent, your child comes to you, especially adults, your adult child, because that's typically where the work begins, right? And if early intervention is not created. And so how can they not be parentally fragile?
Right.
Yeah. And embrace it. So I'm going to let you walk us through that, because there's parents out there, they're like, ooh, yeah, I've been too fragile. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I think that's a great question, because we just kind of talked about how intimate relationships are kind of these mirrors for our wounding and our patterns. The parent-child relationship is a mirror that the parent believes the child is an extension of them, right? So when you have high parent fragility, you have a high belief system that the child is an extension of them. Therefore, if the child is lacking in any way, it means they're lacking, right? And this is where a lot of parent-child relationships get so off course, is the parent cannot allow the child to be their own autonomous person and not make meaning of it about them, So if you're in a space where you're kind of like, I really think that I need to be available for this conversation, or I might need to initiate this conversation of like, hey, I'm recognizing that I did these things while you were a kid, and I'd really like to make repair for him. Be aware that like that reflection that is really uncomfortable is your own wounding. That is not your child doing anything to you. It is the reflection that you're believing about yourself, not the child's belief of you, or the child showing the world that you're this bad parent. And parenting has a huge superiority complex, right? I see this all the time with high conflict families, high conflict parents. The quickest way to make yourself feel like you are a superior parent is to put the other parent down, right? It's not to actually be an enlightened, aware, embodied parent. It's to point out the other parent's lack. And so we get this a little bit in the parent-child relationship, is in order to be the superior parent, we have to point out where our child is wrong. And we can't, because I am the parent and you're the child. So if you're ready to do this work, or if you're a child ready to go ask for this work, not child, but, adult child, whatever age, if you start seeing the reflection of superiority, that's your sign that, hey, I either need to get myself in alignment, or as a child, I need to see if I'm available for this type of response. But as a parent, if you're feeling that, that's a reflection of your own wounding.
Oh, that's so good. I think because it is, each individual has to do their own work. And, I don't have children. They weren't, on my life path in this lifetime. And so for me, but I was a child. So I know what I needed. And, I can't imagine, to have, your adult child come to you and say, I think, some of my issues, my struggles stem from what you did or did not do. And to be able to allow your ego to take that hit without lashing back, without being accusatory or dismissive, or, all the, falling back into old patterns. That's true strength. And that's love.
Yeah.
To say, I may not agree with you, but I'm open to the conversation and I want to hear your experience.
Right.
Because it was different than mine. Right?
And yeah, 100%. And, let's be honest, there will be some children that will come and say, you were a horrible parent and this and that. And, the parent really did try, but to be in that space and be like, okay, I'm not going to own this from a place of I need to be right, but just regardless of how I feel, let me tune into them right now and be like, I'm sorry that, your experience has led you to feel this way. And, I'm sorry that what I may have said or done has influenced that, but I'm available now to make repair, and I'm available to hear what you need. That alone doesn't say, you're right and you're wrong and this and that, but it's like, let me attend to that wound from a space where we can repair and move forward.
I think that's where true courage lives.
Yeah.
To say we can envision a different future.
Exactly. So, and that is, like you said, from a place of love, and not a place of defensiveness and fear that everybody's going to find out that I'm of course the worst mother in the world, right? Or the worst father. But just that there's probably something that needs to be cleared up, because we adults live in an adult world, we're in our heads, we're distracted, we're working, we've got, families and children, and we're not always aware of our child's experience. But when the whirlwind is kind of stopped and a child says, hey, we just have to tune into that and attend to that child.
Oh, thank you. I see a part 2 with this. I think there's going to be, there's more.
A mother wound, maybe a mother wound segment, a father wound segment, because they do, for men and women, or the masculine and the feminine, they do show up oftentimes, and we talk about it in a kind of slang way of like daddy issues or a mama's boy. So there is a lot to talk about with each one of those parental wounds that I think our listeners would be really kind of interested in, and really could guide them to a path of kind of breaking some cycles and patterns.
Oh, I think that's so good. All right, we're going to go ahead and end today, Cristine, unless there's anything else you'd like to offer.
I don't think so. Again, if there is anything that you listeners would like to hear more about, we've got some great guests lined up over the next few months. But we're always listening and looking for what it is that you'd like to hear about. And also maybe some of your own stories and or testimonials. Of course, you don't have to share on the public platform, but we've loved hearing and reading the DMs about how things have related. So, we're always wanting to interact and listen and talk with our listeners.
Oh, definitely. Okay, everyone. If you, like Cristine said, share your experience if you're comfortable, your wounding as well as your healing. I shared a little bit about my own, healing with my mother, and, so please know it's not, you can do it. You may not have the opportunity, but it's open. It's an option. Go ahead, like and subscribe. We love seeing you popping up in part of our subscription and liking, and everything that you need to know will be in our description. We're also going to add MJ stuff in there. Like I said, because we want everyone to go join our workshops, be a part of that. It's very exciting. All right, Cristine, as always, it's such a pleasure talking with you. And thank you for your insight and your knowledge. And you're just such a font of information and, growth and healing. So thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing, some of your own perspective. I know that's a vulnerable place, so we appreciate it.
It is, but it's getting easier. Yeah, as you age, it's a little easier.
What are the benefits?
Exactly. All right, everyone. We will see you next time. Until then, take care of yourself and keep healing.
That's right. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.